At 1:09 a.m., my daughter collapsed at my doorstep, bruised and terrified. What I discovered next shattered everything I thought I knew about the people I trusted, and set me on a path of vengeance that no one saw coming. The night was unusually quiet, the kind of quiet that made you aware of your own heartbeat. The old clock in my living room ticked with a steady rhythm, echoing through the empty house. I had fallen asleep in my armchair, a half-empty cup of tea resting on the table beside me. The television murmured faintly in the background, some late-night talk show I didn't care to watch. My body ached the way it always did these days, 62 years on this earth, and every year seemed to live somewhere in my bones. Then came the knocking. At first, I thought I was dreaming. It was soft, hesitant. Then again, louder this time. My heart skipped. No one ever came to my door at this hour. The clock read 1:13 a.m. I pushed myself up from the chair, joints protesting, and reached for the small lamp on the table. The yellow glow filled the room, revealing the photos on the mantel. One of them was of my daughter Lily, taken on her wedding day. She was smiling, radiant, holding Victor's arm like he was her whole world. Another knock, faster this time, trembling. I felt the old instinct stir. Even after 10 years of retirement, once a cop, always a cop, I moved toward the door quietly, picking up the heavy flashlight I kept near the umbrella stand. "Who's there?" My voice came out steady but cold. No answer, just the sound of shallow breathing on the other side. "Who is it?" I said again, louder this time. Then a voice, small, broken, trembling. "Mom, please, open up." The flashlight almost slipped from my hand. I knew that voice, even if the years tried to make me forget it. Lily. My Lily. I fumbled with the locks and pulled the door open. What I saw made my knees weaken. She stood there, swaying, her face ghostly pale under the porch light. Her lower lip was split and bleeding. One eye was swollen shut, the skin around it deep purple. Her hands clutched her stomach like she was trying to hold herself together. "Oh my God, Lily," I whispered, catching her just as she collapsed against me. Her body felt fragile, too light, trembling in my arms. I could smell fear on her, the mix of blood, tears, and cold night air. "Come inside," I said, my voice shaking. "You're safe now." I guided her into the living room and laid her gently on the sofa. She winced when her back touched the cushions. Her breathing came in short, shallow bursts. I grabbed a clean towel from the kitchen and pressed it lightly to her lip, trying to stop the bleeding. She looked up at me, her eyes wet with tears. He did it again, Mom." Her voice cracked. "I tried to leave, but he locked me in. He said if I ever tried to run, he'd..." She broke down, unable to finish. I froze. The sound of her crying hit me harder than any blow I'd ever taken in my years on the force. I'd seen women like her before, broken by men who smiled in public and turned into monsters behind closed doors. But never did I think I'd see it happen to my own child. "Don't talk," I said softly, brushing her hair from her face. "You're home now. No one can hurt you here." I stood up and went to fetch the first aid box. My hands trembled as I searched for antiseptic. I'd patched up victims all my life, but this felt different. Each wound on her body felt like it had been carved into me. When I lifted her sleeve, I saw bruises blooming across her arm, old ones, layered over new ones. "How long has this been happening?" I asked, keeping my voice calm even though rage clawed at my chest. She turned her head away. "A while," she whispered. I thought he'd change. I thought if I stayed quiet, if I did everything right. I clenched my jaw. Men like that don't change, sweetheart. They just get better at hiding it. I wrapped her bruised hand gently in gauze. The smell of antiseptic filled the air. For a moment, the only sound was her soft crying and the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. She tried to sit up, clutching my sleeve. "Mom, you can't tell anyone. If he finds out I came here..." "I'm not going to let him touch you again," I said, firmer now. She shook her head desperately. "He'll ruin your life too. You don't know what he's capable of." I met her eyes. "You don't remember who your mother is, do you?" The old fire inside me, the one I thought had burned out years ago, was back. I could feel it rising through my veins like heat. I'd buried that side of me when I retired, traded my gun for garden tools and quiet mornings. But tonight I felt her, the woman I used to be, the one who hunted monsters for a living. I fetched her a glass of water, and she sipped weakly. Her hands trembled so much I had to hold it for her. When she finally drifted into a restless sleep, I sat there watching her face. My daughter, my little girl who used to dance barefoot in the kitchen. Now her lips were cracked, her face swollen, her spirit crushed. I got up quietly and went to my study. The room smelled of dust and old paper. My police badge sat in a small wooden box on the shelf. I hadn't touched it in years. I opened the box, running my thumb along the cold metal. "Looks like you're needed again," I muttered under my breath. I opened my drawer and pulled out my old digital camera. It still worked. I walked back to the living room, hesitating for a moment before pulling the blanket back from Lily. She stirred but didn't wake. Carefully, I began taking photos. Her swollen face, her bruised ribs, the marks on her wrists. Each click of the camera felt like a knife twisting inside me. I saved the pictures and locked the camera away. My training told me one thing: evidence first, emotion later. But I couldn't ignore the emotion. My chest hurt so much it felt like my ribs were cracking. Around 3 a.m., there was a sound outside. A car slowing near the house. Headlights flashed across the curtains. My heart stopped. I peeked through the window and saw a dark SUV idling across the street. The driver's face wasn't visible, but I knew who it was. Victor. My blood ran cold. He stayed there for a few seconds, engine humming, then drove off slowly down the block. I stayed still, watching until the red taillights disappeared. Only then did I breathe again. I double-checked the locks, turned off the porch light, and closed the curtains tight. Then I sat back beside Lily, keeping watch like I used to on night stakeouts. The smell of rain was in the air, the kind that comes before dawn. At 4:30, she stirred awake, her voice barely a whisper. "Is he gone?" "Yes," I said. "He won't find you here." Tears filled her eyes again. "He'll never stop, Mom. He told me he'd rather see me dead than let me go." I brushed her hair gently, like I did when she was a child. "Then he'll have to deal with me first." She looked at me with a kind of disbelief, half afraid, half relieved. "You don't mean you're going to—" "I mean," I interrupted softly, "that I know how to protect my own." The words came out quiet, but inside they echoed like thunder. She fell back asleep, exhaustion finally winning. I waited until her breathing steadied, then went to the small desk near the window. I took out a notebook and began to write. Dates, times, everything she told me. I even wrote down the threats she whispered through her tears. I knew how these things went. The system needed proof, and proof was what I would give them. But in my heart, I knew it wouldn't be enough. Men like Victor always slipped through the cracks. I'd seen it too many times before. I wasn't going to let that happen again. Not to her. By sunrise, the first light spilled into the room, brushing her sleeping face with gold. I watched it for a long time. It reminded me that even after the darkest night, there's always light. But this light, this one belonged to me, and I would use it to burn him down piece by piece. When the clock struck 6, I made coffee and poured 2 cups. One for me, one for the memory of the woman I used to be, the one I would have to become again. I took a slow sip, eyes fixed on the quiet street outside. "All right," I whispered to the empty room. "Let's get to work." The morning after, the house seemed smaller, as if the walls had leaned in to listen. Lily slept on the couch under a blanket Nora had left when she stopped by with more broth, and the steam of the soup still curled faintly from the bowl on the coffee table. I watched her for a long time, memorizing the slope of her cheek, the rhythm of her breath, the way her hands rested over the thin blanket, like a bird trying to stay warm. She looked so small, so exhausted. Seeing her like that made the world narrow down to one thing: keep her safe. I told Nora to stay close by for a few days. She insisted and wouldn't take no for an answer. "You did right bringing her here," she said, eyes bright and precise. You have to make sure she's safe, Maggie. I'll sleep in my car if I have to." I thanked her and meant it. Having her in the next house felt like having another set of eyes on the street, a comfort older than any alarm system. But comfort was a brittle thing. By mid-morning, I had slipped into the study and pulled out files I hadn't touched since retirement. Old police notebooks, contacts scribbled in a hand that had once written nothing but evidence and dates. Retirement had taught me patience, not complacency. I made a list. Witnesses to talk to, places to check, what to photograph, evidence I needed to corroborate Lily's story. If there was one thing I had learned from 35 years on the force, it was this. You could feel certain in your bones, but without paper and timestamps, you would be swallowed by the system. Lily woke and washed her face in the kitchen sink. Her skin had the slight waxen pallor of someone who slept in fits, but her voice held a fragile steadiness as she asked how Nora was and whether I'd called her doctor. I told her the CT had shown no internal bleeding, an answer that both soothed and aggravated the ache in my chest. "We'll get you through this," I told her, but I didn't say how. I didn't say I had already started. The first stop was Victor's auto shop. I had watched him there the previous night, the way he leaned against the truck like a man who owned more than he could afford, swaggering while hiding something raw behind his jaw. The shop, Hale Automotive, sat at the corner of Main and Alder, grease-stained and humming like a slow animal. I put on my worn jacket, the one with the shoulder pads softened by age, and walked over as if I had business as a retired neighbor. Victor was under a hood when I arrived, his forearms smeared in oil. He squinted up at me, surprise flickering across the grime on his face. "Mrs. Rowlands," he said, wiping his hands on a rag. There was a curdled charm to how he spoke, the type that asked for favors and expected them to be granted. "You're open on Saturdays?" I asked, standing with my hands in my pockets. "We close at 5. What can I do for you?" He leaned back, contaminants of a man who believed in his own solidity. I smiled the smile I used to give witnesses, small, disarming. "My car's been acting up. Thought you might take a look. Nothing fancy, just a noise from the brakes." He nodded, already envisioning the job. "Bring it in. I'll take a look in the afternoon." I left with a promise and a plan. I knew better than to push too hard too soon. Evidence needed time to mature into guilt. I wanted photographs with legal timestamps, receipts, something that tied Victor definitively to a place or action when Lily was hurt. Not a string of accusations that could be painted as a vengeful mother's wrath. Nora stayed long enough to brew tea and stare out the window with the kind of concern that kept her hands busy. "You'll need help," she said. I'd expected as much. I thought of Michael, an old friend who ran a private investigation business, 20 miles away. He had the tools to pull records quietly, license plate scans, work histories, purchases. I didn't want to drag in more people than necessary, but Michael owed me favors, and favors were currency I intended to spend. Before I could call him, a soft knock sounded at the door. It was Aaron, Detective Aaron Miles. He wore the uniform, now, the badge polished and correct, the man I had once scolded over procedure and then watched grow into someone I trusted. He stepped inside, his eyes taking everything in like someone cataloging a scene. "Margaret," he said, voice low. "Nora told me you might need—" "I need the truth," I interrupted, because I had no patience for another detective's politeness this morning. I led him to the sofa where Lily stirred. Aaron's jaw tightened when he saw her. He took a breath, professional and gentle. "What do you want me to do?" he asked. "Help me gather what will hold up in court," I said. And quietly, "If Victor gets the wind of this, he'll disappear those things." My voice carried a steadiness Aaron recognized. It made him nod. He left with a few promises that felt like anchors. He would pull vehicle locations for last night, check whether any calls were placed to Lily's number, and discreetly flag her medical records so they would be preserved. It wasn't much, but in the hands of someone who still believed in procedure, it was everything. While Aaron did his official work, I did mine. I walked past the shop again, eyes sweeping. The air smelled of gasoline and heated metal. An older man sat on a crate sipping coffee. A young mechanic joked with a radio. I pretended to ask about the police chief's daughter. Small talk that grounded me while my brain mapped possibilities. I took a photo of Victor's phone number scribbled on a receipt through the office window. The shop computer sat unlocked. A slip of invoice paperwork lay beside it, a detail I tucked away in my memory. I didn't force anything. I moved like a woman who had learned to be patient with the rhythm of evidence. That evening, with Nora and Lily safe next door, I drove to a diner 2 blocks away and waited until dusk. I wanted witnesses, people, who'd seen Victor leave the house late at night, who'd seen the truck parked on particular corners at certain hours. Old men who watched the world from the same vinyl booths would tell me what they knew if I bought them coffee and listened harder than I spoke. An elderly couple who ran the diner knew all the routes and routines. The woman told me she often saw a silver truck idling under the streetlight across from Victor's shop around 1 a.m. "He's always got company," she said quietly. "Young girls come and go, but he keeps to himself." The phrase "keep to himself" always made me suspicious. People who keep to themselves often keep things in the dark. I scribbled notes, masking the fury boiling inside with a careful pen stroke. Small facts, I reminded myself. Tiny threads that, when braided together, could form a rope. Back at home, after ensuring Lily had eaten and that Nora would keep her company for the night, I went through the photos on my camera. The close-up of Lily's wrist showed a faint imprint of a watch band and a bruise with a timeline in its colors: red, then purple, then green. Old injuries layered like sediment. I photographed it again, this time with the date stamp and a scale for size. Procedure reclaimed me in soothing, clinical waves. I found something else as night smeared into the window panes. An unreported purchase. In Victor's ledger, a small deposit at a pawn shop down the highway. The ledger's pages were flippant in his handwriting, numbers scribbled without explanation. Pawn shops dealt in things people wanted to forget. Guns, tools, named belongings sold under desperation. I called Michael and asked him to pull records of pawn shop transactions under Victor's name. He was terse and efficient. He promised help in a time frame I wished could be shorter. When Michael arrived that night, he brought a small scanner and a seriousness that matched my own. He sifted through the ledger carefully, calling the pawn shops while I watched Lily sleep under a lamplight. The screen blinked until finally, Michael's face creased into something almost like triumph. "He bought a starter pistol 6 months ago," Michael said. "No registration, sold under a false name, pawn ticket still in their system." His voice was flat, but carried the weight of progress. A starter pistol wasn't a hunting rifle, but it was a weapon a man like Victor might keep to scare, to intimidate. If he had that, it explained the threats. We sat in the kitchen, the clock measuring time in patient ticks, and plotted the next steps. Evidence needed to be more than a suspicion. It needed traceable purchases, timestamps, neighbors who could corroborate the truck's location. I would need to secure Lily's phone records, Victor's receipts, pawnshop logs, and any camera footage that might show his comings and goings. Aaron would help with police channels. Michael would scrape the ledger and pull receipts under the thin veil of a private inquiry. There was a danger in this work, now more present than ever. Victor wasn't a simple brute. He had connections in town, men who polished shoes in the morning and wiped grease from their hands in the evening. He mingled in the small power structures of a town that turned a blind eye because it preferred quiet. I felt the old ache in my hip when I thought of how much fight this would take. I wasn't as quick as I had been at 30, but I had a patience that made up for that. And I had something else, a daughter who needed justice. Lily woke in the night and found me at the kitchen table, the laptop screen glowing weakly in front of me. She sat down slowly, her hand finding mine. "Are you going to get him?" she asked, voice tiny with hope and fear folded together. "I'm going to make sure he can't do this to you anymore," I said. The words meant more than arrest and court. They meant creating a safety that was larger than his reach. We're going to build a case so solid it can't be bent. She nodded as if that could anchor her inside the storm. What if he finds out? She whispered. Then we will be ready, I replied. The certainty in my voice came from years of knowing how to prepare for danger, how to secure evidence, how to set up witnesses without tipping the hand. I had planned for ambushes in alleys and lies sworn under oath. This was another map to chart. When the night thinned into a pale, indecisive gray, I stood and slipped the camera into my jacket. I had a list of places to check in the morning: the pawn shop, the shop's ledger, further entries, and the traffic camera at the corner that might have picked up Victor's truck. I felt the pulse of the hunt in my chest, a rhythm that felt like breathing itself back into life. If justice was a thing you could rebuild from broken parts, then I would gather those parts, no matter how small. I had no illusions about the road ahead. It would be long and crooked and full of men who preferred to keep the truth in the dark. But truth had a stubborn way of finding light when someone kept looking. For Lily, I would keep looking. For myself, perhaps, I was looking for the woman I had been and the one I still could be. Quiet, patient, and relentless. The sun rose a little while later, and with it, a resolve that felt like armor. I knew the first steps. I also knew that the hardest ones were still to come. The third day began before dawn, when the world still held its breath. The street outside was empty, the houses asleep, and the only sound was the soft hum of the refrigerator and the whisper of rain against the windows. I hadn't slept. My body might have been old, but the mind that had once chased criminals through alleyways still refused to rest when there was work left undone. Lily was curled up on the couch, wrapped in the faded quilt that had once belonged to my mother. Her breathing was slow, uneven, the kind that comes after too much crying. I stood watching her for a long moment before turning back to the kitchen table. It was covered in papers now: notes, photos, receipts, printouts from Aaron's database, and a half-drunk cup of cold coffee. The war room of a retired cop who refused to stay retired. On the table sat a photo of Victor, one I'd printed from an old Christmas post on social media. He looked so ordinary in it, his arm around Lily, the perfect husband, a smile that fooled even me back then. I stared at that photo until I felt the rage crawling beneath my skin. Monsters rarely look like monsters. They look like men you might trust. The clock struck 5. Time to move. I tucked the camera, my notebook, and a small recorder into my handbag. I didn't tell Lily where I was going. She needed rest, not worry. Nora was still awake in her house next door, reading by her kitchen light as always. I left her a note on the porch. Keep an eye on Lily. Be back soon. The pawn shop was 2 towns away, a place where secrets changed hands for cash, and nothing left a record that couldn't be bent. The owner, a heavy man with eyes like fogged glass, looked up when I walked in. Morning, I said, offering a smile that didn't reach my eyes. I'm looking for a few old transaction records. I believe you might have sold a starter pistol a few months back. Fake serial number, maybe a Victor Hale. Ring any bells? He hesitated, the way guilty men do when they recognize a cop's tone even without the badge. We don't keep paper that long, he said, tapping ash into a tray. Then you won't mind me checking the register myself. He opened his mouth to argue, but stopped when I slid a folded note across the counter. Not a bribe, just an old instinct to keep things simple. Money made people talk faster than badges ever did. He sighed, picked up a small key from under the desk, and motioned toward the back room. The air inside smelled of oil and dust. Metal shelves lined the walls, cluttered with tools, chains, and forgotten belongings. He pulled a drawer and shuffled through old slips until he found it. Item number 11742. Starter pistol, silver barrel, no serial. Sold to V. Hale, cash. The date matched the timeline perfectly. I photographed the slip, time-stamped it, and thanked him politely. He didn't ask who I was or why I needed it. Some questions, he knew, were better left unspoken. Back in the car, I sat for a while watching the rain slide down the windshield. Each drop seemed to whisper something. Patience, precision, proof. I'd been trained to follow evidence like breadcrumbs through the dark, and this was the first real crumb. By the time I returned home, the rain had stopped. Lily was sitting at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea. Her eyes looked tired but clearer somehow, like she'd made a decision. "I called the shelter," she said softly. "They said they can take me in, help me get legal aid." I studied her face. There was hope there, fragile, trembling, but hope nonetheless. "That's good," I said. "But you're not going anywhere until we're ready." She frowned. "Ready for what?" "For him," I said simply. That evening, Aaron came by again, his uniform jacket soaked from the rain. He placed a folder on the table. "Traffic camera footage," he said. "Corner of Maple and 7th. Caught his truck near your place around 1 a.m. the night Lily came here." I flipped through the stills. The silver truck, the license plate, the timestamp, everything lined up. It wasn't enough to convict, but it was enough to corner him. Aaron rubbed the back of his neck. "We can move this to a restraining order, Margaret. Get her protection officially." "Not yet," I said. "He's careful. If he smells pressure too soon, he'll vanish. I need him to feel safe." Aaron gave me that look, the one that said he wanted to argue but knew better. "You're playing a dangerous game." "I've played worse," I replied. After he left, I walked outside for some air. The night was cold, quiet, and the smell of wet earth filled my lungs. I stood by the old oak at the edge of my yard, watching the streetlights flicker. A silver truck rolled by slowly, too slow, the driver's face hidden behind tinted glass. My fingers curled into fists. He was watching. I didn't move. Let him see me. Let him wonder what I knew. When the truck finally turned the corner, I went back inside, locked every door, and sat beside Lily. She was pretending to sleep, but I could see the tension in her jaw. I brushed her hair back and whispered, "He can't touch you here. I promise." She nodded slightly, though she didn't open her eyes. At dawn, Nora brought breakfast, pancakes and bitter coffee. She sat at the table, her eyes darting between me and Lily. "He was out there last night, wasn't he?" She asked quietly. "Yes." "What are you going to do?" I looked down at my hands. They trembled slightly, not from fear but from the storm gathering inside. "I'm going to make him believe he's safe," I said. "Then I'm going to take everything from him." That day, I started phase 2 of my plan. I printed copies of every piece of evidence, photos of Lily's injuries, the pawn slip, the traffic stills, and stored them in a plain envelope labeled insurance. One copy went into a locker at the post office, another to Michael, and a third I sealed inside my kitchen wall behind the old clock. I'd learned long ago that truth has to survive even if you don't. Over the next week, I began showing up near Victor's world. Not enough to provoke, just enough to remind him that ghosts still breathe. I'd pass by the shop with groceries, pause near his truck, meet his gaze when he pretended not to notice. Each time, his expression shifted, confidence cracking, unease taking root. On the 4th day, he finally approached me. "Mrs. Rowlands," he called, wiping his hands on a rag. "We need to talk." I stopped, looked at him calmly. "About what?" "About your daughter," he said, his voice low. "She's making things up. You shouldn't believe everything you hear." My smile was steady. "You're right. I don't believe everything I hear. I believe what I see." Something flickered in his eyes, panic maybe, or anger. "You think you can scare me, old woman?" he hissed. I stepped closer until we were only a foot apart. "I don't need to scare you, Victor. I just need to let the truth do that for me." For a moment, silence hung between us, heavy and sharp. Then he forced a laugh and walked away, pretending he'd won the exchange. But I saw it, the tremor in his hands as he reached for his keys. When I got home, Lily was pacing by the window. "You shouldn't have gone near him," she said, panic in her voice. "I needed to look him in the eye," I said quietly, "so I'd remember exactly who I'm fighting." That night, sleep wouldn't come. Every sound made me sit up. The creak of the floorboards, the wind brushing against the windows, the soft ticking of the clock. I checked the locks again, then sat at my desk, writing every detail of the day in my notebook. Somewhere between 1 and 2 a.m., the dog barked next door. I froze. A car door shut outside, soft but deliberate. I peered through the curtain. The street was empty, except for a shadow moving near the fence. Victor. He was standing there looking at the house, a cigarette glowing faintly between his fingers. I didn't call the police. I just stood there, my old instincts alive again, my heartbeat steady and slow. I knew then that this wasn't just about protection anymore. This was a war, and I was done playing defense. When the first light of morning touched the windows, I made a decision. It was time to stop waiting for justice to find us. It was time to go out and take it. The house smelled of wet wool and old paper. Rain had come back in the night, drumming a slow, steady rhythm against the roof, and the world outside felt muffled, as if the town itself were holding its breath. I'd fallen asleep at the kitchen table with my glasses on and a notebook beneath my hand. When I woke, my hand was cramped around the pen, the ink smeared where I dozed. There was a tightness in my chest I could no longer call nervousness. It had a name now, escalation. I had thought that showing Victor I wasn't afraid would be enough to unbalance him. I thought watching him from a distance, photographing the truck, tracing pawn slips, and finding witnesses would take the ground from under his feet. People who hid behind violence rarely expected an old woman to pull the threads. They underestimated quiet patience. They underestimated how long a mother could wait. But Victor was sharper than I'd given him credit for. Or perhaps he had help. The next morning he came by my house while I was planting pansies in the front bed, dirt under my nails, sun on my shoulders. He stood close enough to smell the soap on my skin, his voice a low rumble. "You keep my wife away from me," he said. He used "my" like a brand, like a claim welded to the air between us. "She's not your property," I said, and my voice didn't waver. His jaw tightened. "You stay out of this. You want trouble, Margaret? You'll find what trouble is." He pushed past me and reached for the side gate as if to step into the yard, then paused, hand on the latch. I watched him, calm and patient, as if I'd sit and wait for him to finish his tantrum. "You forget who I used to be," I told him. "You forget the badge. You forget what that means." There was no bravado in it, only memory and the kind of measured warning that had once stopped men in their tracks. He scoffed and left with a final, dangerous smile. The way he walked away told me everything I needed to know. He'd felt cornered, humiliated, and humiliated men lash out. That night, Nora insisted on sleeping at my house. "You're not doing this alone," she said. And she stayed up watching old black and white movies as if the flicker of strangers could keep the dark at bay. I appreciated the company. We drank tea, and I told her what I had found at the pawn shop, what Michael had pulled from the ledger, and about Aaron's traffic stills. She listened without making the hollow assurances people offer to make themselves feel better. She simply said, "We'll mark him." It wasn't long before the town started whispering. People who had once nodded at the grocery store now looked at me with a new awareness. Some offered sympathy, others offered judgment, a thin, polite kind that made me angrier than any insult. I had expected neighbors to take sides. I'd hoped for more, but I'd spent enough nights in interrogation rooms to know the town's loyalties were a tangle. One afternoon, while I was sorting through receipts at the kitchen table, the phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize, and for a second I considered letting it go to voicemail, but something in the tone of the ringer made me answer. "Mrs. Rowlands?" a voice said, careful and polite. "Yes? There's a man here asking about your daughter. He gave my niece a flyer and—" "Who did he say he was?" I asked, keeping my voice conversational. "He gave his name as Detective Collins," the voice said. "But my niece said he looked different. She thinks he's a friend of Victor's. He wanted to know where Lily works, asked when she'd be alone. He left a card." The woman on the line sounded uncertain, the kind of honesty small people have when they don't want to be noticed. I felt a frost creeping into my veins. Collins. Collins wasn't a name I recognized at the department, but it didn't matter. The man had used the authority of a uniform as a weapon. He'd used trust as a hammer. I thanked the woman, hung up, and made a list of names. Collins, until Aaron came over and I handed him the phone. "This is bad," he said, jaw taut. "If someone in the force is on his side, that changes everything." He folded his hands and sat down on a chair that creaked like a guilty conscience. "Then we dig further," I said. "Who is Collins? Where did he get his badge? Who vouched for him?" I could feel the old work clicking into gear. The methodical, cold questions that had once saved lives. It steadied me. If there was corruption, we'd find its seams. But corruption liked its shadow. It liked to hide behind loyalty and shared lunches. That evening, I walked across the street where Nora's porch light glowed like an invitation. I needed to see the world from the other side of the glass, to know exactly what a man like Victor might do when he felt the noose tightening. Nora had installed a small security camera months ago, an impulsive purchase she couldn't explain even to herself. We sat on her couch and watched the tape. Time slid past in silent frames. There, on a grainy strip at 2 a.m, Victor's silhouette moved along the sidewalk near my gate. He spoke on his phone, his head bent. The next day, the same footage showed a different angle. Another man, a uniformed figure, slowing his cruiser as Victor waved him down. I replayed the moment until the small grain of certainty grew. The uniformed man stopped, leaned down and exchanged a folded envelope with Victor. The cruiser pulled away, and Victor walked off, shoulders hunched like a man who'd been expecting applause. The sight of that envelope did more than confirm suspicions. It nicked a deeper wound. The small town's economy of favors had been traded for silence. Men took care of their own. The badge, which was supposed to be a promise, had become a coin. I showed the footage to Aaron. He watched it twice before his face went unreadable. "Who do you know at the station who would sell their badge?" I asked. It sounded rhetorical, but it wasn't. He named a handful of names, each circle of familiarity tightening, until one name settled like a stone: Lieutenant Kearns. Kearns was a man who'd been on the force for as long as I had. He'd been on patrol when I used to train rookies. I'd seen him at retirement parties, raising glasses to a system that pretended to be clean. The idea of him lining his pockets with a man like Victor's hush money felt like sacrilege. "You need proof," Aaron said. "You can't go to Kearns with—" "I'm not going to Kearns," I said. "I'm going to the chief, or we go outside the department." My fingers drummed on the table, restless with a plan. We decided to test the water. Michael would tail Victor and look for his meetings with the cruiser. Nora would keep her camera running and try to catch Victor and any visitors on tape. Aaron would quietly request recent call logs to find an inexplicable cruiser presence in Victor's areas at odd hours. Each piece would be small and unassuming. Timelines, timestamps, visual proof. Nothing theatrical, nothing I couldn't explain at a hearing. Days thickened into a tight coil of waiting. Victor's attempts to intimidate grew bolder. He left notes pinned to the grocery store bulletin board, innocuous things about community meetings, each one with an undercurrent that suggested eyes on our house. Once, when I walked to the mailbox, a tire lay slashed in his parking spot. He wanted me to see what he could do to things that mattered to him. It was a childish bit of vandalism, but childish men wielded danger with the force of a machete. Then came the night Lily didn't come home. It began like any other evening, with the regular small noises, the kettle singing, a distant dog raising its voice to the dark, the house light across the street flicking off. I sat reading a worn procedural manual I'd never thrown away, more for habit than necessity. At 10, the phone buzzed. It was Nora. Her voice was a thin thread woven with panic. "She's not at my place." She left her bag on the couch. "There's a note." "What note?" I demanded, springing toward the door before she could finish. "There's a scrap of paper. It says, 'Tell her to come alone.' It's got a time, 12:15. Margaret, I didn't wait for the rest. I threw on a jacket, grabbed the flashlight, and ran. Nora followed in an old cardigan and boots, breath loud in the cold night. The neighborhood slept like a body that had been drugged, unaware. We searched the streets, calling her name until our voices cracked. Cars rolled by, headlights cutting the darkness, and once I thought I saw the glint of a silver truck turning a corner. My heart clenched. Nora's hand found mine, small and trembling with fear that felt like glass. By midnight, my chest burned with a cold so deep I thought it might be bone. We were back at my house when a message came through on Lily's phone, a number that was blocked. A single sentence. Come alone to the lot behind Hale's shop. Midnight. Come alone or you lose her. My hands went numb. The paper had demanded solitude, and the phone had demanded obedience. Whoever had Lily wanted me stripped of help. You go, Nora said, steadier than I felt. I'll call Aaron. No, I said. You stay with the truck lights on. Don't go anywhere. I could see the worry tearing at her, the need to do something, but I could not let her. This choice was mine. I drove slowly, the world reduced to a narrow ribbon of asphalt in the beam of my headlights. The lot behind the shop sat empty except for the silent hulks of a few old cars and the smell of oil and rain-slicked tar. The air felt sharp, like someone had shaved away the edges. I parked my car where the shadow could hide me and got out, my heart a steady drum. I left the engine running. The night was thick with menace, and the lot seemed too small now, the walls of the world closing in. I walked to the center of the lot and waited. The cold bit through the thin jacket to my bones. I could hear footsteps, slow, deliberate, then a figure coming into view. Victor's face took shape in the dim light, and beside him a uniformed man stepped forward. My stomach fell. Where is she? I asked, voice a steady blade. Victor smirked. You came alone, like we said. He took a step forward. The uniformed man reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded envelope, then tossed it at my feet like a confession. We're just keeping things straight, Mrs. Rowlands. Keep your daughter in line and there's no trouble. My hands went to my coat, fingers empty. I felt the world narrow to the man's breath, the glint of the envelope, the quiet night. Something fierce rose in my chest, a heat that was older than fear. I wasn't surprised by the collusion. I was appalled at the cowardice of it, the smallness of men who would trade a badge for a few bills and a smug sense of power. Where is Lily? I said again. I felt stupid for asking, as if they would answer kindly. Victor's eyes were ice. You'll see what happens if you play the hero, Maggie. He backed away, the uniformed man sliding into the shadow to block him if needed. They walked off, leaving me with the envelope and the cold. Inside the envelope was a single photo. Lily, bound and gagged, a bruise blooming on her temple, taken from an angle that suggested they'd been watching her for some time. The edges of the photo were sharp, the paper thick, meant to cut. I sank to my knees in the lot, the gravel supporting me like a bed. Rage and revulsion warred with a sharp, precise focus I'd not felt since the early days of my career. The rules had been broken. The town's promises lay in shreds at my feet. Men who'd sworn to protect now used their power as a toy. I took the photo, folded it into my pocket, and breathed in a measured way. Panic would scatter my plans. Panic made men like Victor bold. I had to think. I had to move. I spoke into my collar quietly, the way I used to on stakeout radios. Aaron, it's me. I'm with the lot behind Hale's shop. I've got proof they've got Lily. They're using Kearns. Don't come in guns blazing. They'll move her. Bring discretion. Bring backup without fanfare. His voice came in the earpiece, raw now. Margaret, how... I'll tell you later, I said. Do what you do best. Don't let them know you're here. The night held its breath again. I folded the photograph and slipped it into the lining of my coat, feeling the thin cut of paper like a promise. I had proof now, not only of Victor's violence but of the betrayal threaded through the badge. It was ugly and powerful in a way that made the edges of my vision harden. When the sirens finally came, they were a low whisper, far off, not the blare of a drama, but the precise arrival of something that would hold in court. I stayed in the lot until the lights came and men in plain clothes said things that sounded rehearsed. I handed over the photograph, the pawn slip copies, the traffic stills, and the neighbor's footage. Each piece of paper slid across the table like testaments. Later, when they found Lily and brought her back like a small, exhausted bird, I felt the world tilt back towards something like balance. She was bruised and hollow-eyed, but intact. She wrapped her arms around me and cried in a way that made the ground beneath me tremble. That night, as I sat on the porch with a cup of coffee gone cold, the town felt different. The air tasted like consequence. The men who'd thought they could buy silence had shown their hands. It had cost us all more than I would have liked, but it had also given me the single most precious thing, the truth in my pocket and the sight of my daughter breathing beside me. I looked down at my hands, scarred and sure, and I knew the path forward would be ugly and long. But for the first time since she had stumbled to my door, I felt something like a blueprint, not just of revenge, but of justice that could stand when called to account. The next morning, the air was gray and heavy, swollen with the kind of silence that comes before a storm. The world outside my window looked washed out, lifeless. For the first time in days, Lily slept in her old bed upstairs. Her breathing was shallow but steady. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the photo I'd found in that envelope, her bruised face frozen in a moment of terror. I had looked into the eyes of murderers, but that photo hurt more than any crime scene I had ever worked on, because this time, the victim was mine. Aaron had done what I asked. The corrupt lieutenant, Kearns, was suspended pending investigation, but Victor was still out there. They hadn't been able to pin him to the abduction yet. Too many loopholes, too many hands ready to take a bribe or turn their eyes away. I knew how the system worked. I'd worn that badge long enough to understand that sometimes justice came limping behind the truth, if it came at all. When Aaron called that morning, his voice was tight. He's on the move again. My contact at the station said Victor's trying to clear out the auto shop. If he gets out of town, we might lose him. Then we don't let him leave, I said. Maggie, you need to stay put. Don't, I interrupted. You've seen what he did. You know what he's capable of. You bring him in by the book and he'll slip through the cracks before sundown. Aaron was quiet for a long time before he said, Don't do anything reckless. I hung up before answering. Reckless wasn't the word. What I was about to do was necessary. By noon, I had a plan, not the kind I used to draft with a team, not the neat flow of coordinated tactics. This was something rawer, simpler. A trap set by a mother, not a cop. I packed Lily's phone, the photograph, and my old service revolver. I hadn't used it in years, but it still gleamed like memory. Nora showed up just as I was closing the door. I knew it, she said. You're going after him. You should stay here with Lily, I said. She stepped forward, her hands trembling but her voice fierce. No, I'm not letting you face that animal alone. I looked at her, the deep lines around her eyes, the courage flickering behind them, and nodded. Fine, but you stay behind me. We drove to the edge of town, to where Victor's auto shop stood behind the empty industrial lots. I'd been there before years ago when it was still just a small repair place. Now it was a fortress of corrugated steel and oil drums. The front gate was open, one of the doors half hinged. Wait here, I told Nora, parking the car a few blocks away. She didn't argue. I walked the rest of the way on foot, the revolver heavy in my coat pocket, the air thick with rain. Every step felt like walking deeper into my own past, the investigations, the night shifts, the faces of men who thought they could get away with anything. When I reached the lot, I saw movement through the glass of the office window. Victor. He was packing something into a duffel bag, his motions quick, agitated. The sound of a metal door clanging echoed through the building. Someone else was inside. I moved closer, keeping to the shadows. Through a gap in the side wall, I could see him arguing with another man, a younger mechanic, pale with fear. You said it was over, the man shouted. I didn't sign up for this. Shut up, Victor snarled, grabbing him by the collar. You think you can just walk away? The mechanic tried to pull free, but Victor shoved him hard against the car frame. I could hear the crack of bone and the dull thud as he hit the floor. It was instinct that made me move, not thought. I pushed open the side door, the hinges crying out in protest. The noise made Victor spin around. His eyes widened for a second before narrowing to slits. "Well," he said, his voice dripping with venom. "Look who couldn't stay away." I stepped inside, keeping my hand near my coat pocket. "It's over, Victor," he laughed. "You really think so? You old fool. You think anyone will believe you? I've already cleaned up your mess. That photo you found, it's gone. Evidence disappears fast in this town." I took another step closer. "Not all of it." His expression flickered. For the first time I saw doubt there. I pulled out my phone, pressed play. The recording began, his voice from the night before, sharp and cruel. "You'll see what happens if you play the hero, Maggie." His face went pale. "You. Every word you said is backed up, and every cop who helped you is under investigation. The difference between you and me, Victor, is that I know what proof looks like." He lunged toward me. I barely had time to move. His hand caught my shoulder, shoving me hard against the wall. Pain shot down my side, but I managed to stay upright. The revolver was out now, aimed square at his chest. "Don't," I said. He froze, his chest rising and falling in fast, shallow bursts. For a second, I saw it, that flicker of uncertainty, that small human crack in the monster he'd become. But then he smiled. "You won't shoot me. You're all talk, Margaret. You don't have the guts." I didn't answer. I didn't have to. He stepped forward again, testing me, and the old reflexes came back on their own. The alignment, the breath control, the squeeze. The shot echoed through the shop, bouncing off the steel walls like thunder. Victor staggered back, eyes wide, one hand clutching his shoulder. He fell against the workbench, knocking over a box of tools. For a long moment, neither of us moved. Then he tried to reach for the duffel. I kicked it away, keeping the gun leveled. "Stay down," I said, my voice low and cold. Nora burst through the side door a moment later, breathless and shaking. "Oh God, Maggie." "He's alive," I said. "Call Erin." She fumbled for her phone, her hands trembling. I stood there, revolver still raised, while Victor groaned on the floor, muttering curses between shallow breaths. It wasn't triumph I felt. It was exhaustion, the kind that seeps into your bones and stays there. When the sirens came, they were louder this time. Real. The lot flooded with red and blue light. Aaron was the first to reach me. His eyes swept the scene, then landed on the revolver still in my hand. "Put it down, Maggie," he said gently. I did. The metal felt heavier than it should have. Paramedics swarmed Victor, lifting him onto a stretcher. He was pale and bleeding but conscious. When his eyes met mine, they were filled not with hatred, but fear. The kind of fear that only comes when a man realizes his power is gone. Aaron pulled me aside while the officers secured the scene. "You saved lives tonight," he said quietly. "We found 2 more girls in his basement. He was planning to move them across state lines. You ended it before he could." For a second, I couldn't breathe. 2 more girls. My knees nearly buckled, but Aaron caught me by the arm. "He'll live," he said. "But he'll never see the outside of a cell again." "You have my word." I nodded, though the words felt distant. I watched as they loaded Victor into the ambulance, the doors closing with a final metallic thud. Rain began to fall again, slow, deliberate drops that streaked across my face. It felt like the sky was washing everything clean. Nora came to stand beside me, wrapping her arm around my shoulder. "You did it," she whispered. I shook my head. "No," I said quietly. "We did what we had to. That's all." We drove home in silence. The lights of the squad cars faded behind us, swallowed by the mist. When we reached my house, I found Lily waiting on the porch, wrapped in a blanket. The moment she saw me, she ran forward and threw her arms around me. I held her tight, feeling her heartbeat against mine. "It's over," I whispered into her hair. "You're safe now." She nodded, crying softly against my shoulder. Inside, the kettle whistled on the stove, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I let it sing. The sound filled the house, not as an alarm, but as something gentle, something alive. As I looked at my daughter, at the quiet house that had seen too much, I realized this wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about reclaiming something that Victor had stolen: our peace, our faith in the world, our right to sleep without fear. But deep inside, a part of me knew the fight wasn't done. Justice would have to survive the courts, the lies, the system, and I'd be ready, because the badge might be gone. But the fire inside me, the one that had been buried under years of silence, was burning brighter than ever. And for the first time in a long while, I wasn't afraid of the dark. The sun rose pale over the horizon, spilling a weak, watery light through the mist that clung to the town. Inside the house, everything felt eerily still. Lily had fallen asleep again, curled under a blanket on the sofa, exhausted but safe. I sat at the kitchen table, the faint smell of coffee and wet rain lingering in the air. For the first time in days, I allowed myself to pause, though only briefly. My mind was still racing with evidence files, photos, and reports stacked neatly in folders I had labeled. Victor Mendes, case closed. Or at least I hoped. Aaron had been in contact with the district attorney all night. By morning, they confirmed Victor was being moved under heavy security to a federal holding facility. Kearns and the other officers involved were officially suspended, and internal investigations were underway. It was a victory, but the weight of what had been uncovered, the betrayals, the hidden hands, the abuse, pressed down on me like wet cement. I stepped outside, the air crisp and tinged with the smell of wet asphalt and soil. The neighborhood had begun to awaken, children running to buses, neighbors waving. Everything seemed normal again, but I knew better. A thin veil of normality stretched over a town that had almost allowed darkness to thrive unchecked. Nora joined me on the porch, her hands wrapped around a steaming mug. "You did it," she said softly, her voice barely audible above the rustle of leaves. "I didn't do it alone," I replied, my voice hoarse. "Lily's alive because of everyone who refused to look the other way, who refused to stay silent. But it doesn't erase what happened." She nodded, understanding without needing more. We sipped in silence, letting the quiet seep into our bones, fragile as it was. Later, I went inside to check on Lily. She was awake, her eyes bright but still wary. She clutched my hand like a lifeline, the kind of grip that tells you the world can still hurt, but also heal. "I'm scared, Mom," she whispered, voice trembling. "I don't want to feel that again." I held her close, feeling the weight of her fear and her resilience in equal measure. "You won't," I said. "Not while I'm here. I promise you'll never feel powerless again." Even so, I knew the shadows didn't vanish overnight. Trust had to be rebuilt, and the scars, both visible and hidden, would take time to fade. I made a mental note to call the counselor, arrange therapy sessions, and keep a watchful eye. Protection was more than muscle or firepower. It was attention, patience, and unwavering presence. That afternoon, I gathered all the evidence one last time, placing the photos, reports, videos, and phone records into a secure box. I labeled it clearly, then locked it in the closet. The box would serve as insurance, a reminder, and a shield against anyone who might try to claim the past didn't exist. By evening, the rain returned, light and persistent, tapping a steady rhythm against the windows. I sat on the porch again, notebook in hand, recording observations, reflections, and plans for the future. Each word felt like reclamation, a step toward restoring the world that Victor had tried to poison. Aaron stopped by, silent for a moment as he observed the scene. "You've changed the course of this town," he said quietly. "Few could do what you did." I shook my head. "No, I did what any mother would have done, what anyone who refuses to ignore injustice would have done." My eyes drifted to Lily, sleeping peacefully in the living room. It's never just about me. It's about them, the ones who can't fight for themselves. Night fell slowly, the town glowing with the scattered lights of homes settling into calm. I went inside, turned off the lamps, and watched my daughter sleep. Her breaths came steady, rhythmic, a quiet lullaby that was both fragile and strong. For the first time since the ordeal began, I allowed myself to believe that we were safe, not because the danger was gone, but because we had taken control. I reflected on the months of planning, watching, documenting, and waiting. Every surveillance tape, every phone record, every pawn slip had been a thread woven into a net, one that finally caught the men who had abused their power. The system had cracks, yes, but the human will, patience, intelligence, courage, could bridge them. Before bed, I opened the window to let in the damp night air. The scent of rain-soaked earth was intoxicating, grounding. I breathed deeply, allowing the tension to leave my body in slow, deliberate exhales. The fight wasn't over. Not entirely. Life never allowed for complete closure. But for tonight, justice had been served, and the balance restored. I tucked my notebook into the drawer, turned off the remaining lights, and checked the locks one last time. Lily stirred, murmuring something in her sleep. I brushed a strand of hair from her face and whispered, "We made it, honey. You're safe now." In that moment, I understood that being a protector, a mother, and a survivor wasn't a Title I war. It was a constant state of vigilance, empathy, and courage. And as I finally lay down to rest, I knew the strength we had found together would carry us forward through whatever came next. Outside, the rain fell steady and soft, washing the streets, the trees, and the world in quiet assurance. The shadows still existed, but they no longer held dominion over us. For the first time in a long time, I felt the weight of justice balanced, fragile but real, settling into place like the softest dawn. The long fight had ended, but our lives, ours to protect, nurture, and rebuild, had just begun.